a system that prioritizes the kid's address over his aspirations is not one I aspire to. The whole idea that we have a school that is desirable and we're going to put a line around it, that sets up a winners and losers paradigm kind of right away.
Welcome back to the OpenEd podcast. Really excited today to have Derrell Bradford on the show. Grant from our team said, Isaac, you got to talk to Darrell. He's doing a ton of cool stuff. So Darrell is the president of 50 CAN, which is an education advocacy organization. And Darrell has a ton of experience with charter schools, a lot of different forms of, I would say, school choice, for lack of a better term. I don't know how you label yourself, but I'm going to give you a second. Give us like a quick intro to yourself and your work.
Yeah. So Isaac, thank you very much for having me. So 50 CAN is, we're a national organization and we support 10 local leaders across the country who are lobbying, advocating, doing elections, a whole bunch of other stuff to try to improve education in their states. The states are an interesting mix. Connecticut, New Jersey, Delaware, North Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, Louisiana, Colorado, New Mexico, and Hawaii.
That is a very interesting mix in terms of like the political environments you're probably dealing with there.
Well, and we think that's a feature of the model, not a defect. And one of the things that we work really hard to do, other than working across the aisle to implement solutions that are best for kids, is sharing ideas that we get, in one state and in another state. And so I've been here for a long time at this point. I used to run our New York campaign. I lived in New Jersey, so I know sort of a lot about this region. And I work on all kinds of school choice. I'm a very strong charter school supporter. I've worked on tax credit scholarships and vouchers, and I'm very excited about the growth of ESAs and care a lot about open enrollment and a whole bunch of those other things. And I'm happy to discuss them with you today.
I love it. I love that when you talk about the feature of working in all these different political environments. One of the things that's so cool about working in education and opening up education is, yes, you have various institutional interests that are at war with each other. You might have teachers unions over here, or ESA administrators over here, or private schools over here, or you get these various things, and they compete and they fight. But parents across all political beliefs, they all just want as many quality options as they can get for their kids. Like nobody wants fewer options and less freedom for their child in creating an educational experience.
Yeah, man, you ain't wrong. I was just doing a thing the other day, and we kind of we were talking about this, and like Spencer Cox and I can't remember, Helen Ayad, I think is what her name is. She's the new senator, new governor in New Hampshire. A few other folks, and then thinking about last cycle, somebody sort of offered, hey, like it really looks like kind of red state governors is popular with these things, and not so much with blue state governors. And I was like, well, like the politics of that might look that way, but when you ask the people, it's very popular, regardless of what their worldviews are or whatever. Like they care about the kids and want the best opportunities for them.
So Grant mentioned to me a bit of a personal anecdote about open enrollment, maybe part of what got you so passionate about it yourself. He said that when you were young, you had to put one of your relatives' address so that you could go to school in a different district. Is this a true story? Am I telling something I shouldn't be?
No, this is very close. This is very close to the truth. So I hadn't reflected on it. There's things that happen to you when you're young, and then like later on, you get a job working in education policy, and you realize that they were about education policy. But I grew up in Southwest Baltimore, and I was zoned to a middle school. It's called Harlem Park, which for those who are TFA people, it is the school that Michelle Reed did her TFA core stint at many years later. And that is in the Sandtown Winchester section of Baltimore where I was growing up. And my mother did not want me to go there. And so she didn't think it was going to be the best fit for me. And so my mother and my grandmother one day were having this conversation about whose address we might use so that I could go to Mount Royal, which is in the Bolton Hill section of Baltimore, close to the Maryland Institute College of Arts. And now I'm like, that was highly illegal. This is deeply, deeply subversive conversation going on there. And it's, it's a conversation that kind of sadly, like lots of Americans had, like not just my Black low income family trying to get the best education for me. This is pervasive at lots of different, income levels. And I had this kind of quip about it. There's 4 ways that like most people are experiencing school choice in America. You're lucky, as I ultimately was. I got a scholarship to an independent all boys day school, which was incredibly formative and important to me. And I'm like really grateful for that. And it powers a lot of what I do. So you're lucky, you're connected, right? So the right people, you get the hookup. I remember when Joel Klein took over the New York City Public Schools, he said the first office he closed down was the one that used to place politically connected people in public schools. So that was the first one we got rid of. So you're lucky, you're connected, you're rich, in which case none of this matters. You buy the right house, you get exclusive school assignment, or you pay tuition, or you lie, which is the way most people, engage in this again at like all income levels, all races of people in all kind of places. And a system that prioritizes the kid's address over his aspirations is not one I aspire to.
Man, it's amazing. You can have these debates in like an ivory tower vacuum. I remember back in the day, I grew up in Michigan and I was homeschooled, so it didn't directly impact me, but charter schools were just coming on the scene. And there's these huge debates. The public school institutions were saying, oh, this is terrible. This is bad. Public schools are great. They're going to steal funds from public schools. And charter schools are saying no. But then when they finally authorized the first few and they had a lottery system for people to get in, I remember seeing the people sitting there in that room when they announced who got in and people breaking down in tears about getting in or not getting in. This meant so much to them. And I'm like, once you see that and you feel that, you recognize, okay, there's clearly something wrong here if people feel that much emotion about trying to get out of the school district that they're in, trying to get in. They didn't even know yet if this charter school was going to be a better experience. They just wanted an option,
Yeah, you're sort of 2 things you get onto here that are super important. And a friend of mine, he did a movie back in way back called The Cartel, which is like, kind of peak education fight in New Jersey. And he covered a charter school library at an extraordinary charter school here in the city of Newark called North Star. And it's hard, it is devastating to watch, right? Because everyone knows what is at stake. I mean, this is a school that already does exist. It has like an outrageous track record, and the joy and the sadness, like it's really kind of painful. And so on the one hand, it's like there's that, right? On the other hand, like we have this relationship with the education that's right for you, because our education systems are built on scarcity, not abundance. So the whole idea that we have a school that is desirable and we're going to put a line around it, and only certain people get to go to it and other people can't go to it, right? That sets up a winners and losers paradigm kind of right away. You can look again. I'm in the Northeast. In New York City, the most attractive high schools that aren't charter schools are magnet schools run by the city. They're extraordinarily good schools. They are all test in, and so there's like a real fight every year. Like it's very high stakes to get into Stuyvesant, Brooklyn Tech, Bronx Science, Hunter High, like a couple of other ones. And no one ever says, like, why don't we just double the size of the school? With this, there's no reason why we can't have a second campus of Stuyvesant. Instead, the discussion is always, I'm upset, frustrated about who gets in. So instead, I need to figure out what is fair, which is the position that most electeds take. And that's the position of scarcity. We shouldn't be rationing opportunity in this way when we know that we can, make schools, learning opportunities in school, out of school, support other modes, homeschool, all these other things to help kids become the best version of themselves. I mean, it's not that hard. Parents have done the work already.
Yeah, and I love that. And if you allow those market forces to work, they will work. Like there are plenty of charter schools that are under their cap because they're obviously not attractive to enough people. It's not like you would just suddenly have one school that every single student attends and every other school, because then that school would lose quality. So the ability to shift and move and grow and to remove those restrictions. So this kind of transitions me to I saw something, I think it was something that maybe you tweeted or your organization tweeted about a public school, I think in Arizona, doing some sort of a la carte offerings. And this was really interesting to me because one criticism of public schools that I've never liked is, oh, this is a bad class, or it's low quality, or it's not very good, or the teachers are paid too much or paid too little. Right. I think those don't really make sense absent a market. As long as you're just like, everyone's forced to go, you're kind of guessing. And once you start to open up, when people who criticize public schools, I'm like, look, I don't know if this is a good or bad school. Certainly there are good teachers within that school. There are good things, there are good classes happening within that school, and there are some that are bad. But if you start to open it up and treat it like you would other consumer goods, when it comes to food, we go to the grocery store and it's like, nobody says grocery stores are bad. They might dislike certain products, right? But you have this ability to go in and you buy the things you want. If you only like organic stuff, great. And so the idea of a public school saying, hey, we're going to put prices and create a menu and we're going to offer a la carte options, because parents ultimately don't care if they're labeled homeschool, private school, public school. They care about what the experience is. And if you can go take 2 classes that are really good from your local public school and then go online for 2 classes and then do a homeschool co-op, I love that opening up. So I'd love if I'm correct in that tweet of what's happening, I'd love your take on that.
So you talked about a couple of things that I think are super important. So one is that, particularly with regard to teachers, and teacher pay, let's say, that's a really good thing. I would argue that the challenge with teacher pay is that it's not subjected to a market right now. And that's a bad thing for teachers. So, yes. When we, when people are like, well, teachers are paid more, I'm like, okay, great. I'm totally on board with this, but I don't negotiate teacher contracts, right? School boards and collective bargaining. So I'm not that guy, right? There's a different person you need to talk to. But if we move from an environment where there's basically one large single employer to one where there's more optionality, well, then we're having a very different conversation. So I think that the market opportunity that a lot of this opening of education provides to improve teacher compensation, teacher choice, right? All of the teacher matching is super, super important. So I just want to put that out there. That's the first thing. The second thing is just that some people argue that we shouldn't have market forces in education, right? Because education is not a consumer good. And I'm always like, that's totally incorrect, because we actually do have a market for education already. It's called the housing market. So it's what it is an unfair market, right? It's one that not everybody has the capital to participate in. And so the benefits are sequestered, right? They're acutely derived by a few people who can afford to play it at the highest level and who are most aware of the fact that it is a market, right? So, or that it costs things, or that it's not exactly free, right? There's some people are like, public schools are free. It's public schools are free, properties, all these other things, So that very much changes the relationship that people have with the market that public schools exist in. So that's my second thing. The third thing, which is a super important thing, and I'm glad you raised it. So I'm very supportive of public schools. I want this, radical new world. It's all open and everything else. But I totally affirm the public schools role in that world. Some people are still going to want to choose their neighborhood school, and that's fine. At the same time, I think that if you're in Arizona, where now there are families who have ESAs and all kinds of other things, you want to be at the table helping them put together the thing that works for them, right? And I think that's an important thing for charter schools too. Like I might want to homeschool, but I don't want to build a physics lab onto the onto my house. Like I think we saw this initially with Tim Tebow laws back in the day, which is like, like I might want to home educate my kid or do something else. But I want to play lacrosse at the local school, right? I don't want to have to mow down.
You can't deny, you cannot. It's hard to compete with the Friday Night Lights. That's a real thing, and it's an amazing thing to be a part of.
It's a social thing, and I'm happy to have kids and schools and communities, come together in that way. And I just say all that to say that I feel like, and COVID kind of kicked it up. Like I know a lot of what we're talking about now sort of pre-existed on like the proto, like most people were really aware of it pre-pandemic, and then like post-pandemic, lots of people sort of like, oh, there's all this, like there's a different way to put it together. I would just say that like along with the change in modality, right? We're I can get something from my district here, I can homeschool here, I can get a tutor here or whatever. There's also a change in the way people think about assembling education. And I have this little like mnemonic on it. So you can get the bundle. And the bundle is what most people normally get, right? So you buy, and you normally get it with your house, right?
Yep.
So it's a seat in a school and the whole thing is wrapped up. And some people like the bundle. You can get what I call Bundle Plus, which is how the real ballers do it, right? So that is, you get the best bundle you can, and you go all in on all of the other things to help make a kid the best version of themselves. Sports, trips, enrichment, volunteering, scouting, whatever, all of that stuff, which normally which costs money, obviously. And there are a lot of studies on the fact that it's not that poor people don't spend money on these things. They just don't spend as much as rich people do. So it's the same effect. Then you can get what I call the half bundle, which I think is a lot of what we're talking about, which is that, I want to predominantly organize my kids' education myself, but I want other things through somebody else, right? Or vice versa, which is, sort of like growing and maybe the best of both worlds. And then you can just go your own way, right? You can homeschool, you just put it together yourself, you hire your own teacher, you and 10 people get a teacher and do it, that way. And the change in the way people consume school is as important as how the change in delivery is happening.
Yes. Yeah. It's interesting. There's almost like a bell curve, where it's like most people lumped in the middle kind of take the basic bundle. On one far extreme, there's Bundle Plus. On one far extreme, there's people who reject the bundle entirely. And that bell curve is kind of flattening out, and you're getting a much more even distribution. And it's interesting too. There's a lot of, you're seeing more customization throughout the life of a child, where at the younger ages, they're more unschooled, a little homeschooly, and then you start to add layers to the bundle as they get older. Now they're doing 2 days a week activities, now 3. By the time they get their driver's license, they're doing everything. And that's a very common pattern with homeschoolers. They get to that teen years, they want to start to go to school, they want to do more stuff, they want to be around. And you kind of like, and I think there's kind of a really interesting natural pattern there. A lot of kids, it's different for each kid, but really young kids, they might need more time to not be just immediately fully into that, and to kind of be able to. And I love seeing the way that these things are breaking down, even on the teacher side. I think a lot of people who are teaching in the system might feel scared when they look at some of these changes, declining enrollment and like what's happening, school choice stuff. But when I meet people who are teaching, I'm like, don't underestimate the market value of the skill you have as a teacher. And it's been cool to see some teachers say, wait a second, if I could go run a micro school for like 10 kids and they pay $6,000 each, I make 60 grand, and I do what I do it how I want to do it. And I can even do it 3 days a week or 4, you know?
And I do it in a way that I love because
Yes.
I'm leading it. See, you raised this really interesting point. I hadn't really thought about saying it this way before, but yes, enrollment in traditional districts is down across the country, but there aren't fewer kids right now, right? So like, and yeah, like the birth rate conversation is actually an important conversation. But from 2 years ago to now, there's still basically the same amount of kids. So you look at a place like Florida, where this is going on all the time, and the sort of market for teachers is just much more flexible. People are going in psych in system, out of system. They're starting their own micro schools. They're starting charters. You have charter school folks who are leaving to do their own thing, and all of this has had profound effects on pay and satisfaction. I was talking to somebody about how like choosing a school is about like matching three things. Let me see if I can get the three things together. Right? It's the mission and values of the school, right? It's the sort of hopes and dreams of the parent and the aspirations of the child, right? Like all together. You got to line it all up. And that works for teachers too, and sometimes as your address is not the best way to figure out what you should be, human potential. The like getting assigned to school X because it has a vacancy and class Y because you are the youngest person doesn't mean you're going to have the best experience as a potential educator. And people always wonder why there's all this turnover in the first 5 years of teacher of the teaching profession, and it's because you routinely give the least prepared people, the newest people, the hardest jobs with the least support, and anybody who can do anything else goes and does something else. The challenge was there used to be nothing else to do that was actually in education. And now there's a lot more to it.
Mm. So I know you guys had a study that you put out recently. I think it was the state of educational opportunity in America.
Yep.
I would love, give me a quick rundown of the study and what do you think are some of the most intriguing findings?
Yeah. So this thing was a nightmare to do, and I'm pretty I'm pretty pumped. It wasn't my direct project, although my team did all the design and stuff with it. So we we're a multi-issue organization, and we have like a vision. This basically like the 5 things we think a family, like a kid, should be able to have, right? So we had the education that's right for you. That's our school choice pillar, school finance pillar. We have tutoring and care for all things. We think tutoring is a powerful lever, but that's also where the people are. And certainly mental health is a real issue after the pandemic, right? We have an open and connected learning pillar because we think we should reward learning no matter where it happens. We have a pillar that we call a parent's right to know, which is about information and transparency, and then college and career. And so we were trying to figure out a way to define success under that umbrella that wasn't just that we lobbied successfully and passed a new policy. And we kicked around a bunch of stuff and we decided to do a survey instead. And so we surveyed 20,000 American families.
That's a big survey.
It's huge. It's us and Edge Research, actually. They did the phone calls and everything like that. We didn't have the staff 50K and called 20,000 families. Since the sample's so large, we got all kinds of information about from all kinds of different demographics of families, like some that you never see because the sample size was so large. And we basically mapped all of the questions against our little rubric. And so we got kind of like school satisfaction, out of school and tutoring, information and engagement, college and career readiness, and kind of student wellness. And so I would just say that, let me give you some of the top line findings out of it. So what we found is that sort of like, in a lot of respects, is about the survey is about inequality. But our approach to this is that everybody should have what the people who are really balling out have. Other people take the opposite approach. They're like, the people who are really balling out, those guys are getting too much. We need to take something from them. We're going the other way, right? So, what we found is that like rich families and sort of like the best students, like A students or whatever, they are getting the most in school and the most out of school, right? So they're going to museums, they're going on trips, they're volunteering, they're doing all these other things. And in school, they're getting sort of the best thing they can get. And as you track income, you find that like kids with lower household incomes do less of those things. So it's pretty sort of extraordinary. That's the first thing. The second thing is that there's unmet demand for all of it. So the gap between people who say, hey, I'd really like that, and people who are getting it is huge at all income levels, right? So there's if you're in the advocacy world, you might say there's a huge constituency that is interested in these things that doesn't have them available. So that's the second thing. The third one is that this is not just a story about like high income people and low income people. Middle income people are getting squeezed to death too, right? So because the financial pressures are broadly felt, right? So they're not just free and reduced lunch, whatever, but like well up into what people would consider middle income. Families are still saying, I want these things and can't afford them. So that's the other thing. The fourth thing is that there are large differences in school type in school satisfaction by school type. And you could read that in another way. The more a parent is aware that they chose a school, or the more they're invested in it, be it financially or sort of from a vision, mission standpoint, the higher their satisfaction is. Mm-hmm. So that's one. Transitions matter a great deal. So like one of the slides is about mental health. It's like super important. The drops in student mental health are precipitous in 4th grade and 9th grade. So if we're thinking about like the best way to help students or when to intervene, those might be the kind of best times to do it. And then the last kind of big finding, and there are tons of other ones, like the survey's huge. You can download it. Our state, we did it for all 50 states. You get state breakout or the whole thing at 50can.org. We have this we got graphs and fancy, drawings and what we call the beach ball, which you'll figure out when you get there. But the last one is really that how parents receive and use information is very different across income and actually counterintuitive. So lower income families, they trust grades and the teacher. Higher income families trust themselves and their friends. So high income families say, if I think this assignment is hard, it must be hard. And then they use their social networks. Lower income families are institutionally trusting, right? So they're like, I want to know what the school says, whatever, which turns on its head a lot of what people think about how low income people get their information, right? They would think that, well, you just talking to your friends about what this is. It's like, which is very important. So there are lots of interesting things in there. Like we asked families, what are the 2 biggest barriers to having your kid do more enrichment, whatever, transportation and money, over and over and over and over and over again. We asked them, if you had to choose between 10 things that you think would provide the greatest benefit for your kid, what would they be? The number one is sports. Tutoring is widely spread in the South and the Southeast. Like there are more kids that are getting tutoring there than elsewhere. And there's sort of a huge asymmetry in tutoring. Like B and C students get it the most, but D and F students want it the most, right? So things like that. The Northeast is all in on camp and summer, that kind of thing. And states that have sort of a lot of choice, and I'll count DC as a state in this too. I know that's aspirational for DC, but like DC, Arizona, Indiana, Florida, they do pretty well on school satisfaction and information. because they're in environments that are more sort of market friendly. So now everybody can do better. Like even our best states have like a huge gap between where they are and what we could consider like really knocking out of the park. But it was fun survey to do, and I encourage anybody who wants to dig into the data to go ahead and download it.
I love that finding you mentioned about, I guess, like agency or participation when parents feel that they have had some role to play in shaping or choosing the education. And that's just a great takeaway if you are an educator to whatever extent possible, allowing parents to feel more agency, that they're not just being given something. It reminded me of kind of a principle of design. I've hired many freelance designers over the years to whatever, do a company logo or something. And a good one, they'll go through their process. They won't just ask you what they want and then come back and say, "Here it is, I made it for you." They'll ask you way more questions than they probably actually need. And then they'll come to you and say, "Okay, here's a bunch of concepts. Tell me how you feel about these." And some of them might already know what they're going to design in the end, but instead of just giving it to you, in which case you're going to say, "Well, I don't know if I like it." But if they involve you in every step in the process, you feel so much more invested in, like, okay, now I understand why it looks this way. And I had a voice, I had a say. I think that's just a really powerful. I mean, you don't meet people very often who are like, "Oh, I hate my church," because people choose churches, right? And they choose to participate. They have agency there. But you might meet people who are like, "I hate the local school district," if they don't feel that they're, a part of that. So that's
Yeah, yeah. And I think you've actually sort of touched on something else that's kind of really important in that. So that at 50 can, like in a lot of respects, we are and have been sort of traditional accountability people, right? Like we think assessments have like a real important role to play, highlighting gaps and a whole bunch of other stuff. But you regulate, sort of like a market and a monopoly differently. And one of the things that we're talking about now in a more constructive way is like, how do you engage with a family, with a child, with a parent in a way that is nuanced enough to tease out what their actual vision of success is. And I can remember back in the day, back in the way back, I had a designer who was working for me, and I was like, we were talking about redesigning a website, and he was like, "What do you want it to be?" And I remember I said, I wanted to look like milk on slate. That was the thing. Because I wanted sort of like a cool grayish thing, but it was really, and I only say that to say that some of the intangibles are really hard to describe, right? Like
yes.
some of the pieces of sort of human potential are like really hard to nail down. And it takes like a more holistic process to think about, okay, how do I make sure that we're hitting on this thing? And that is maybe a more nuanced companion take on, our a parent's right to know principle about transparency that is very front and center in this big discussion right now.
Yeah, that give and take is so key, and having thousands of experiments, because it's not like, "Oh, well, parents should get to decide what the education looks like," because if they don't always know what they want, they don't always know how to describe it. But it's also not, "Well, let's just create it for them and shove it down their throats." There has to be a dance, a give and take, in a process. So I want to ask you a question. I don't know. I can't verify these statistics. This is something that I heard recently from someone. But if you look at all of the different types of choice programs available across all of the states, there are virtual schools, charters, part-time enrichment programs, ESAs, some special education specific ESAs, there's vouchers, there's all these different things. The uptake on those is surprisingly low from my understanding. If you took all the people that qualify for these various programs and then you look at what percentage are actually being used, what do you think that gap is? There's this clear demand for more options and more choice, but the types of programs that are currently offered don't always, some of them do. Some of the ESAs have huge wait lists, but they don't always have the uptake you might expect.
Yeah. So this is, I mean, we sort of alluded to it earlier. So the natural state of the American public education system is a monosystem. And there are 13,000 plus school districts that are all sort of like highly regulated, very top down, and you're sort of fighting to get what you want out of it, right? And that system works for tons of kids. The tons of kids it doesn't work for, but that whatever. But that approach has been the American approach for a very, very, very long time. And what is it, like 1999, I think? The first was in 1990. God, I'm getting old. The first voucher program in Milwaukee is passed, right? And so that is highly structured and highly constrained as a program. It's only low income. It's only Milwaukee. It was they fought like hell to keep it from even happening or whatever. And then I think it was 10,000 kids in that program, and it was 10,000 kids for like 20 years or something like that. I can't remember exactly 20 years, but for a very long time before they expanded the program to like Racine and I think like another place, right? You think about charter schools, right? Take Massachusetts. I don't know how many kids in Boston, predominantly are in charter schools. Although I know the charter schools in Boston are very high quality, but like 8 or 9 years ago, maybe it's 10 years. Again, I'm getting old. It's all fading in this background. They had a statewide referendum that was going to increase the amount of charter schools, like nominally, and it went down 2-1 because again, like so over the last 5 years, the net increase of students in charter schools in Massachusetts is 23, right? 23, like not 230, not 27, 23, right? In New York City, we have a charter cap in New York City that we've hit. So all of the new enrollment that happens now is only in existing schools. There will be no more charter schools here. And so one of the things I think is really important when thinking about the share of kids who are in these programs is that they were designed over time to have very small footprints. Like even letting them exist was a huge concession. And so you had to constrain the concession. And we lived like that for 25 years. And then West Virginia, Arizona, Iowa, Arkansas, maybe Texas next year, Florida converts its programs, and then you have 12 or 13 states that have said, hey, we're going to take the lid off of charter school growth, and we're going to have this other thing called ESAs, right? And so the way that we think about growth now, I think, will be very different than those first kind of 20 years. Now, all of that said, like people like the bundle, and that's fine, right? And so if you were in the bundle business, I think there's basically nothing to worry about unless you don't want to compete, right? Or unless you don't want to change, or unless you don't want to be a part of the unbundled market, as we kind of talked about earlier. And that's the evidence I think we're going to see over the next like 5 years. But one quick thing on this, though, which I think is super important, and maybe for your listeners, particularly ESAs, of which I am a supporter. An ESA is not a mode of education. It is a revolution in school finance that enables other kinds of education to come into existence.
Yes.
So it's not a voucher, right? Like a voucher gets you a seat. That's a kind of thing. Like an ESA gets you possibility, which could include a seat, but is not limited to that.
Yeah, an ESA allows the possibility of an ecosystem to emerge around because it's a different funding mechanism. So all of these different ways to actually deliver an educational experience are able to blossom under that mechanism, but it still requires that ecosystem. And it's been interesting for me. I still think there is some really big information asymmetries because when you're dealing in the realm of like policy and nonprofit advocacy groups, they're about changing laws and regulations. And so once they get that accomplished, they're like, cool, mission accomplished.
We're good.
They're not marketers. They're not consumer marketers. And so you'll often find these laws have been passed. It takes a long time for people. I live in Florida now. I was living here for almost a year and we homeschool our children.
Okay.
before I even knew that there was an ESA in Florida.
Yeah.
And it's like the biggest one in any state. And I'm like into the education space. And so it's just one of those things where I think it's still young and there's still a lot of unknowns around like, what does it look like? And because the policies may or may not change, there's a little hesitancy for, vendors, for example, to bank their whole business model on the assumption that the funding is going to be there next year. So I think there's a lot of growth. All right, I'm going to ask you a final question.
Sure.
That's very, very like right now trending topic related. I saw you post this somewhere about the Department of Education. So a lot of people in the of school choice arena or just reform are kind of like, look, eliminate the Department of Education. Most people don't know the federal Department of Education is actually pretty new. It's not really the entity that most schools are run at the state and local level. Right. So it's kind of this bureaucracy over the top that kind of, gives them these top down things that annoy them all. And hey, you could just get rid of it. And I saw you say, you might not want to do that. You might need the Department of Education. I'm curious, give me your take for what role the Department of Ed could play in helping advance school choice.
Yeah. So I had sort of a quippier thing about this, but I was basically like, if you, most of the things that at the time, either prospective administration would want to do would require the department. And the time it would take to actually get rid of it means you never get done what you want to get done. Mm-hmm. So it is sort of too important of a lever to actually get rid of, though it should certainly operate differently. I think that's the thing. And the most important things I would say where school choice is concerned is that, the department handles civil rights law. And so, for instance, it can make it harder to open a single sex high school, which like I went to an all boys school. I'm a big fan of them.
I would love to see more of those,
Yes, and so would I. I'm like, yeah. I'm a big fan. They can make it harder or easier to open those. They can regulate charter schools, so that they must be more like traditional district schools than less like that, right? Which is counterintuitive or whatever. So those are like kind of two, they can have guidance around the charter school program grant that makes it harder or easier to start new charter schools, across the country. Those are just kind of like three instances, and there are many more where they can make it easier or harder to do these things. But I totally agree, and this is the important thing. The states are way out ahead of the department right now. So, what Florida and Arizona and, Indiana and West Virginia and Iowa and Arkansas and Oklahoma and all these other places are doing is like on a different, planet compared to where the department is right now. And so, and we sort of know how people feel about, rightly or wrongly, about the federal role in these things right now. And so my advice is really like for whoever the secretary is or whatever, to just kind of like, help, but hang back. Yeah, there it is. Help, but hang back. Don't make it harder for states to do the things that they are already doing. And the one thing that the USDOE can do is convene in a productive way. And so the helping states learn about what other states are doing, tackle the problems of all of this, together. That is a unique role that a unique and collaborative role that a federal agency could have. And I enjoy seeing something like that.
Darrell, this has been an awesome conversation. I got to say, there's been so much progress and movement in the last just handful of years on the opening up of education. And for anybody who is taking advantage of that, enjoying that, whether your charter school or ESA or your public school has started to open up what they could do, Darrell is at least partly to thank for that. You've been in the trenches for a long time, and I know that what you're doing at 50 CAN is no small part of this overall movement. So thank you.
You're very kind. Thanks, Isaac. Thank you for having me.